Welcome to episode 8 of 48 Hour Heroes Origin Stories. I'm your host, Kirk Nordenstrom, co-city producer of the Seattle and Montana 48 Hour Film Projects. This episode is a two-parter. It's a two-parter because of the power of Filmapalooza and the power of the 48 Hour Film Project city producer community. In 2013, at a spectacular Filmapalooza in Los Angeles, hosted by Leanne and Michael Westfall. They always put on a great event. I had the great fortune of meeting two individuals who I now refer to as my maple syrup brothers. That's Steve Nash and Christopher Cherry, the co-producers of the Toronto 48 Hour Film Project. At that event, we became instant lifelong buddies, and I look forward to any Filmapalooza where I get to see these two. We stay in touch via Zoom because, well, you all know why we stay in touch via Zoom, but I've developed a kind of friendship with both of them where we don't see each other often enough. But when we do connect in person or over Zoom or text chats on Facebook and Facebook Messenger and whatnot, it's like no time has passed. Our conversation is going full speed ahead from the moment we say hello. And this one with Steve, I predicted it the moment we started talking before the camera was rolling that it was going to go long. And we chatted for 2 hours. It felt like we'd been talking for only 15 minutes, but conversation with Steve is just that easy. And I split the episode in half at a very specific point because we're getting into a topic about diversity, inclusion, and representation in the 48 Hour Film Project that it's not an easy topic to address as a cis hetero white male in the United States. And the situation in particular, it was hard for me. It was hard for the recipient of the award because of my words and my actions. You know, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and my intentions were entirely positive. I was trying to be a good progressive, but my words and actions didn't match up with my intent. So I split the episode there so that I could front load this story in the next episode, which I'll release in a couple of days. But Steve and I had a great discussion about exactly this topic, and I can't wait to have on the team leader that this story is about, because he was just so fucking cool about the whole thing. And we had a great, very productive, and for me, very, very informative discussion. So, all my blathering aside, please welcome co-producer of the Toronto 48 Hour Film Project, Steve Nash.
So it really doesn't matter what you look like, say or do. I know that I had a cooler weekend than you.
All right, welcome back to 48 Hour Heroes Origin Stories. And with me today is one of my maple syrup brothers from Toronto, the co-city producer of the Toronto 48 Hour Film Project, Steve Nash. Welcome, Steve.
Hi, Kirk. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's good to see you on the computer screen.
Yeah, I wish we were in person, but it's great to be here.
That's how we met. It was Filmapalooza 2013 in LA.
Yeah.
I think your cohort, Cherry, and I were pretty inseparable at that event.
It was. I loved that LA event. It was just incredible. It was a ton of fun. It was actually, the interesting part was my wife Colleen. She always viewed like Christopher Cherry is my co-producer in the Toronto 48 Hour Film Project. Now we're very different. We have different personalities, and it works out really well for us as producers, especially when we're dealing with filmmakers and the general public, because people will either like me or like Christopher. So we can sort of like push each other towards a direction of like who we think will actually resonate more strongly with whoever we're talking about. But Christopher has always been known as, he's the guy who's a little bit more rock and roll. I'm the guy who's a little bit more straight edge. And so going to LA, my wife Colleen said, uh-oh, you're with Christopher, there's going to be trouble. That guy knows how to party. And he's a bit of a drinker. And she likes Terry a lot. But she figured that he was going to be the person that was going to get me into trouble. Instead, when we're in LA, it turned out to be almost the opposite. Christopher was suddenly the person who was, you know, like looking at things logically and saying, Steve, I don't know if we should go walk underneath that pier right now. There seem to be some pretty sketchy looking folk hanging out there, and it is late at night.
The Santa Monica pier.
Yeah, and he's like, it's kind of late at night. Yeah. He goes, I don't think that's the safest place to go. And I'd be like, no, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. But instead, Christopher's like, dude, we're not going there. And then I look back on it and I go, oh, I think that's why I'm a co-producer with Christopher, because he can be that voice of reason. And we do work well together. So we both have our strong points, we both have our weak points, and we can sort of juggle them and go like, you deal with this better, you do it. I deal with this better, I'll do it. And sometimes we'll just mix it up.
Yeah, that's pretty much how it works with my co-producer, Chris. She's more of an outgoing person than I am. She's a little more extroverted. I don't like to say that I'm an introvert because I'm not. I love hanging out with people, but I'm very selective about it. I'm more of an ambivert with a slight introvert tilt.
Yeah.
But Chris does a lot of interactive live events. So she brings a lot of expertise and experience in that area. And when we're doing events, she has a lot of, you know, I'm kind of stuck in my rut with, you know, how 48 events go in Seattle. And she will bring something up and say, why don't we try this? Or why don't we try this? This might engage people. So stuff that I never would have thought of, she'll bring to the table, which is nice.
Yeah, I actually, that's how I feel with Christopher. And that's how I feel about a lot of the other like 48 city producers. It's kind of the benefit of us being together in one place or online, but typically more in person at a Filmapalooza where you can hear about some people's best practices. You know, like I'll hear what people are doing and like what Robin is doing. I'll look at her events and think, that's amazing. Like I love the production value they put into their events, how they theme out a screening night.
Robin and Dwayne, yeah, they really pull out all the stops. They do a lot of innovative, inventive, creative stuff in San Diego.
And they make it a real sort of like red carpet event. And we try our best here with that, but we know that we always have room to grow, that we can always make things better. And every year we try to add some improvements. And I'm almost embarrassed to say, like, we've been producing Toronto for 12 years and we still don't have it down. Like there are still things where we can improve.
Oh yeah.
There's an opportunity for us to increase sort of like really the value for any of the participants. And and we're learning and we try, and sometimes we just don't have the funds. A lot of times we don't have the timing. Like for us, we may be stuck with a 2-hour theater screening spot. And there's only so much we can do within that period of time.
Yeah.
And we wish that we had more time, or we have so many teams that we just can't really sort of like run those individual events to the degree that we want to.
Yeah.
And we're at the stage now thinking that, well, we're going to have to add an extra event into the mix. And I think that was us looking at doing more of a wrap party. We've always in the past tried to do a wrap party after our best of screening.
Yep. Same here.
And the problem is, this is a competition. And there are a lot of people who still don't necessarily agree with the judges' results, or they were so close to their film that they're not ready yet to necessarily celebrate other people's success.
Yeah.
Because they're wrongly thinking that they didn't succeed.
You're at the awards show, damn it, you succeeded.
Yeah, like you made the film, like all it is, it's a race. Like you did this competition and you finished it. You can make a film in 48 hours, or if you're late and you made a film in 50 hours, You did it. You should celebrate it. And every film has something of value.
Exactly.
And so everybody should hopefully walk away feeling energized to do more, to do like more creative, regardless of if it's a 48 endeavor or something else.
Yeah.
But when we get to that wrap party, we realize we don't capture all the teams. There'll be a lot of teams that aren't in the best of that will come out and celebrate, but we always lose some. So we're now thinking that maybe we're going to start running a wrap party after the premiere screenings, but prior to us making an announcement of who's moving into the best of.
Oh, interesting.
And maybe even do the announcement of who's moving to the best of at that wrap party.
Oh, that's an interesting approach. It's kind of how Filmapalooza, it used to be that the big party was the night of the awards, and they changed it up. I believe it was in Atlanta was the year it changed. So Friday night was when the big party was, because what we saw happening at the big party after the awards is only a certain amount of people were getting all this attention.
Yeah.
And whoever won, whoever took home the most awards, they just get swamped. And then there would be these pockets of social gatherings. And Mark and Liz decided, no, we need this to be a celebration of everyone. So they moved it to Friday before all the winners were announced. And I think the parties are more inclusive now. They are more socially engaged, which I think is a great thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's really important for people to celebrate their accomplishments, regardless of what it was.
Exactly.
And every year we run our premiere screenings a little bit differently. But there were 2 years that I was the most proud of where we decided that we would actually show less films at each premiere screening, and then put more time on the back end for Q&As. So instead of running 15 films that would run 90 minutes long, we have a 2-hour time slot. We could talk to a few teams. Instead, we'll just actually run 10 films, take up a little over an hour, and then we can use the rest of the time to do more in-depth Q&As. And structured it by, after all the films screened, we'd be up on stage and I would one by one go through the films and I talk about an element of the film that I truly enjoyed. Maybe it wasn't the best part of the film, but it was always something that I thought where they really excelled. And I wouldn't talk about all of it. I wouldn't say this is the best film I've ever seen.
Oh yeah, we can't do that as CPs.
Yeah. So instead, it would be more focused on, I love the cinematography. I especially love this one shot.
Yeah.
I would talk about that shot. Then I'd invite one of the filmmakers from that team to come up on stage and I'd ask questions about that element that I truly enjoyed. And then maybe more general questions about how was their weekend, the ups and downs, the trials and tribulations, all that stuff. But most of the time it was focusing on the element that I liked. And it was a bit challenging because you know how it is, like films start to blur in your mind. Sure,
Yeah.
You've watched them all a number of times, but when you're dealing with, say, 80 films, it's a lot of films to keep straight in your mind.
It is. Yeah.
So I make some little notes and I talk about it. And some films are frankly not that great. And as a whole, if you're really looking at it, you're going like, okay, this is not a great film. But every film, when you start to dig, it's easy to know where people failed. Like if somebody had bad sound, we don't need to talk about how the film had bad sound. We all know it.
Yeah. And that's the most common problem with 48-hour films is post sound. There's just not enough time for it.
Sound's always the killer. So in this stage, we say, like, we don't need to talk about that. We don't need to talk about that bit of bad acting or the poor lighting. We don't need to talk about those things. We all know that. And I go, let's focus on where they succeeded. That one little bit of acting that we thought was transcendent, that one shot, that like one bit of cinematography that was incredible. Or even digging deeper and saying, I like the concept of your film.
Yeah.
We know that they didn't execute the concept perfectly, but when you start to look at where people succeeded, you start to view these films in a different light. And after doing those Q&As, I'd have other filmmakers come up and say, Steve, you know what? I wrote off that film you were talking about, that you said that you liked the essence of the film. You like the concept. They go, I completely wrote it off as being garbage. And they said, but once you started talking about it and they had a discussion with the filmmaker and it humanized it all,
Yeah.
And we really started to see the filmmaker, see what they were trying to do. They said, suddenly they looked upon that film in a different light, and value was added to it.
That's great. That's fantastic.
I think that's our ultimate goal of city producers, is to get all the filmmakers to focus on where they succeeded.
Yeah.
And really sit there and go, look, and then build off of this. Take the energy. We all need wind in our sails. Take the energy from where you succeeded and then put it in to continuing your filmmaking outside of the 48 and for future 48s.
Exactly. I've always viewed my role as a city producer as a cheerleader.
Yeah.
Who sometimes has to enforce rules. But anyone who completes a 48-hour film is a hero in my book. Hence the name of this podcast. And yeah, I think it's our obligation, it's our duty as city producers to not be critics. It's our duty to be cheerleaders for everyone who's involved. Yeah. And one of my favorite moments in Seattle, it was 2015. There was a group of, I think they were like 13, 14-year-olds. And one of them is a young African-American kid. And it was the first film they'd ever done. And that year, a traffic cone was this 2013. It was 2013. A traffic cone was the prop.
Yeah.
And these kids went to town on the prop. It was great. And it was their first film. It was not the greatest production value, but you could see they were having fun, and there was heart in it, and there was the core of a story. And that was the year I developed the Spirit Award for Seattle. And when they came to the screening, they all had shirts with their team names made, and they just showed up and were loving it. So I had to give them something. They needed to be acknowledged in front of everyone, and especially for students. And one of them being an African-American kid, like, they need recognition, because it's hard to get recognition that young and being Black, and they got to work twice as hard for 1/4 the recognition. So I felt honor bound to make sure that they got the recognition that they deserve, and a little extra. And this kid was so moved by getting the award, and so was his father, that they just started going nuts and put him on the path to being a filmmaker. And a couple of years later, when he was 16, he shot the bulk of a feature in Tanzania.
Wow.
And I got to hook him up with a bunch of people. So he took a handful of my friends to Tanzania to shoot this feature. And I wound up finishing up the edit for it. But in everything that this individual made after the 48, he gets a traffic cone into the film as an homage to where it all began for him.
I love it.
And yeah, I'm so blown away by that to this day. And he went to USC for film school, and he's in his early 20s now and has a career in filmmaking.
Yeah.
Because of the 48. And he just going, dude, you did a great job. This is your first film. It's amazing. Keep it up. And I'm so happy that he took that in the spirit it was intended and ran with it, made it his own.
I love that sort of that because that is really our job.
Yeah.
Is to sort of recognize, support, and motivate. And the hard part is that we can never lie.
Yeah.
So you can't ever say, hey, I love the cinematography in your film. Because if the cinematography wasn't excellent, nobody else will ever believe anything that you ever say again about cinematography, because they'll say, well, they're just trying to placate sort of like the filmmakers. They're just giving away fake sort of recognition and awards. So like looking at it and saying, and it is the harder part. We've done that with awards too, and saying, here's an award that we're maybe even going to create to recognize somebody, but we spend our time trying to figure out what would that award be? And we actually followed suit. I think we copied your Spirit Award a few years after you started it, and we moved to sort of like Spirit of the 48. And but we're still pretty careful with that. The people still have to sort of like really represent what we think 48ers are.
Exactly.
You know, and I look at them as just sort of like these intrepid filmmakers who aren't going to quit. They're going to persevere and they're going to complete the task on time or not on time, but they're going to finish.
Yeah.
And some of my favorite people are people who have problems during the filmmaking weekend. Like I actually, every Saturday after like where the kickoff's always on Friday, Saturday afternoon, you probably get the same thing every year. At least one team, usually a few, call us up and tell us the disaster story that they've just experienced. And it could be teams disintegrating, like there's been some infighting and half the team has walked away. Or there's equipment failures, they've lost hard drives, whatever it is. And they always say the same thing. And it's either to me or Christopher. They go like, guys, we're going to have to drop out. Just phoning to let you know we had some problems.
Heartbreaking.
And my response is always the same. I'll say like, well, what happened? And then it's only noon on Saturday. You still have you've got like 30 hours.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, what does that mean? I go, make another film.
Yeah.
Write a new script. Work with what you got. And you lost that camera. Use your phone. I don't care. Make a film. Finish the race.
Yeah.
And they always say, they go, but Steve, it's probably not going to be that good. And I'm like, so what? I go, that takes the pressure off. Now you're not racing to win. Now you're just racing to finish. I go, now you have no pressure.
Yeah.
Make your film.
Yeah. Very early in the Seattle 48, we were holding our drop-off event at the old location for the Seattle Film Institute, which was literally a house on the east side of Seattle. It was basically two houses. And this guy came running in. His film was late. He was exhausted and just looked delirious. And I asked him, hey, what's up? How did the weekend go? And he's like, it was a shit show. Just, the entire cast and crew bailed, but I had to finish this. I could not finish this. So he took, and this was 2006, 2007. So it was some crappy mini DV camcorder thing. And he did this weird prisoner of war shot in almost complete darkness of him just dealing with being a captive alone in a dark space. And he admitted, he's like, I'm not proud of what came out of this, but I'm proud of myself because I got it done.
Yeah.
That's a huge part of why I do this, is to encourage people like that.
That's the spirit of the 48. And I think it's a test of all filmmakers. It's just, for a real filmmaker, things are great when everything's going along smoothly. But in film, things rarely move smoothly. And the test of the filmmaker is, how do you deal with adversity? How do you deal with obstacles that come in your way?
Yep.
And so when you have an individual or a team that will persevere and make something, and even knowing that it's not going to be of the same, maybe same production value, because they've already been up for 24 hours straight, they're exhausted, now they're starting over again.
Yeah.
They know that what they're putting forth wouldn't be necessarily as good as if they'd had that full 48 hours to make the new concept.
Yeah.
But they finish it. And those are the filmmakers that I love. Like, I'm so happy when I see it. It makes me feel good about running the 48 in Toronto. It makes me feel good about the filmmakers. I'm inspired by that. And they're like, yeah, you did this. And that's awesome. And I go, not only did you start over again, like you got it in on time, or not only did you start over again, but you got it in reasonably late. And the people who stay up, who are late, and that's always when they had technical problems.
Yeah.
So the people that suddenly send us their film and it's midnight, well, normally with the drop-offs, we're at a bar. We collect the films at a bar.
Yeah.
I think you do the same thing.
Yeah.
So we'll stay till the bar closes. And every year it's not uncommon for the bar to close and Christopher and I to be waiting outside for a filmmaker who's telling us, they go, honestly, we'll be there soon.
Yeah.
And we'll take their film and we'll screen it.
Yeah, of course.
And we love the people who do that, who come in, because it's so easy to quit. You know, like quitting's easy. Like I'm great at quitting things. It's like sort of persevering and sort of finishing the race. That's inspiring, especially when you've dealt with problems.
Exactly. Growing up, I was never into team sports. I didn't play football or basketball. I was a swimmer for 10 years, and I was a decent swimmer. I was ever going to go to the Olympics, but I probably could have, had I stuck with it, finaled at NC2As.
Okay.
You know, top 8 in the 500 freestyle or something. And I think being in an individual sport gives me a level of insight and empathy into the 48-hour film project and what people are going through, because when you're swimming, you're ultimately, there's people on either side of you and you're trying to hit the wall first, but ultimately you're just pushing yourself to get to the end as fast as you possibly can. And I think even though we have teams that are in a competition, the ultimate competition is within themselves.
Yeah.
Get the film done. And sure, there's going to be awards and the screening, but I think the screening is the ultimate award.
Yeah. Oh yeah, sure. Well, it's the premiere screening.
Exactly.
Yeah. You know, I always, that's the one issue that I have, like with the 48, where I become sort of split, because I'm a pretty competitive guy. Like I like competition. I respect competitive people. And I think Christopher is the same way. I shouldn't really speak for him, but we talk about it. We like people who they're going for the gold. People who sign up and they want to win sort of world acclaim and $1 million. We tell them that this is not the project for you.
Yeah.
And I go, but if it's a little bit more dialed down competition, you go, you want to do your best, you want to push yourself, you want to get the best product, and you want to win. You want to go to Filmapalooza, you want to go to Cannes. We respect that drive. But what we then really want for people is to be able to drop their original goal if it turns out that it's not going to work out that way. So you can easily go into this competition thinking, I got a great team, we're prepped, we're ready to go. And then you start making your film and you realize, oh, this is not going to be a masterpiece. And I think as a filmmaker, we all get to that point somewhere during a project where we realize that this is good, but this is not going to be as good as I was hoping it would be. For people to accept that and say like, well, that just is what it is. You know, you try your best and you want it to be incredible, but you should still be pretty happy when you make a great film.
Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes we'll see filmmakers who actually, I shouldn't say sometimes, all the time. We see filmmakers who make great films that don't move into our best of. Films that I wouldn't even necessarily change.
Yeah.
And I just say like, no, that film stands on its own. It's a great film. It just so happens that it's not in the best of. And maybe with a different panel of judges, maybe it would have been, but it probably wasn't going to win regardless. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't be proud of it, and doesn't mean that it wasn't really enjoyable to watch. There'll be films that I'm going like, I love that film. I'm so happy that this team made it. I've watched it 3 times. I've enjoyed every moment of it. And then to see them later on being upset with how they placed, or upset with the film, upset with the work they did, that's what I find to be kind of upsetting. And we always hope that maybe it just takes a bit of time. And with a lot of teams, especially the more competitive ones, sometimes it might take a couple of months till they realize that maybe their baby wasn't the most beautiful baby in the world, but it's still pretty damn awesome.
Yeah.
And sometimes people just need some distance.
Yeah.
And then going on to that judging side of things, we'd always say like we agonize about judging more than probably any other element of the 48.
It's very important.
And our goal is to make it so that all the filmmakers agree with the results, or sorry, should say agree. All the filmmakers understand the results, but they don't necessarily agree with them.
Yeah. Well, we as city producers, we don't always agree with the judges.
No, we work on panels. We tried different sizes of panels, and we had one year we had a panel of 6 people. One was a professional film critic. That's what they did for a living. Figured that's best judge ever. This is what this person does for a living. We found out when looking at the judges' results and hearing how they responded to some of the films, we realized that they had some biases. And the biases were coming through and into their results. And there'd be certain things where you're going like, I don't know how you're really biased about cinematography to the degree that you are. So there'd be a film with great cinematography and that judge would give it a 2 out of 10. And you're thinking, well, that's incomprehensible because looking at all of your other scores, I see the baseline here of your scores is around 5. And this certainly isn't below that baseline. How did it become a 2? And then we analyzed it further and we saw there was a pattern. The person really didn't like seeing, I think the person was a bit of a misogynist, and they didn't like seeing strong women in sort of like lead character roles. So the way we dealt with that was we disqualified our judge. We just took all the results and said, like, we have 6 judges, and we're not using a person who has a bias against anything. And just saying like, no, like these results are gone. We tear it up and say, that's how we deal with sort of moderating judging. And it's unfortunate, but I think you see it a lot of times that people's like bigotry comes into play on judging. And it's the hardest part of sort of like putting together these panels and going like, because they're not all created equal.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is something that we struggle with more than anything. And it's something that later on we agonize. This year we had a couple films that I thought should have been in our best of that weren't. And it's still bothering me now. It took about 3 months. There was one film in particular that I thought was a brilliant film. And I went, this is a best of film for sure. And it bothered me for about 3 months, where I just couldn't shake it. I'd wake up in the morning and I'd think about this film and going like, I think there's an injustice has been done.
Yeah.
I don't think it would have won. But it
deserved more recognition than it got.
It deserved recognition, like, and and we felt like it was shortchanged.
In Seattle, I noticed a pattern of almost every single year. There were 1, 2, maybe 3 films that were not going to take the big prize.
Yeah,
but I felt that the judges overlooked that definitely had merit. And luckily, my film school alma mater, the Seattle Film Institute, is super, super, super supportive of the 48. And we came up with a great prize and award. We have our Emerging Filmmaker Award. And I'll hand over a slate of 3 films that I think kind of got overlooked by the judges, and the Seattle Film Institute will pick their favorite of those and give a $5,000 institutional grant.
Wow.
Towards either classes or a degree program at the Seattle Film Institute.
That is amazing.
Yeah, and one year they gave it to every member of the team that won the award.
Oh,
there were like 10 people on the team.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and people got very excited by that. And I came up with that idea because I'm still very close to the Seattle Film Institute. I taught there for a long time. It's my alma mater. The director of the school and a bunch of the staff, they're all dear, dear, dear friends. And we wanted to do something a little deeper than just hosting the kickoff or drop off at SFI. And this problem in the judging came up, and there was always, like I said, just a handful of films that deserved recognition, but not necessarily to win top honors. And this was our way to address that. And it's been a very popular award, and I think it really fit that niche that it needed to. And it really came about because there's one judge who I've used a handful of times. And I picked this judge because I'm really fond of their adherence to story structure.
Yeah.
And to emotional connection. But there were 2 times when this individual was involved that I really think they made the wrong decision for the right reasons, but it was the wrong decision. That one film in question got put up into the top 4 films, and honestly, it shouldn't have been there because it was really poorly edited. It was poorly shot, but there definitely was a very strong emotional core to it.
Yeah.
It deserved recognition, but I just don't think it should have been in the award screening. And ultimately it was. And I think it got second runner up, ultimately, is what we agreed on. But this judge overlooked all of the professional flaws in it.
So the technical side they overlooked, and they're looking
Completely.
more on sort of the story.
Yeah. He said that it was, of all the films, it was the one that made me feel the most.
Yeah.
And I totally respect that. And this judge also has a very, very strong personality. So facilitating it was interesting. But ultimately we came to a top 3 that all the judges could agree with. And we had consensus. And it was after that I thought, no, we need a special category for something like this that probably shouldn't be in the top 3.
This is a thing that comes up that judges ask us all the time. And they said, like, how are you going to evaluate this? And we say, well, here's the different criterions, and some of it's technical. Of course, some of it's story driven, performance driven, but it has to be, I said, the essence of it is that a good film is a film where you're able to suspend your disbelief and stay within the story.
Yeah.
We're looking at sort of the harder technical components. And I go, if the sound is so atrocious, or you hear cut, or you see a boom drop into the sort of the frame.
Yeah.
For many people, that will take you out of the story. You're no longer a participant. You're a critic.
Yeah.
And I go, the moment you become a critic is the moment that the film has failed, in my opinion. Yeah. And that's where I would probably agree with you if there's so many technical issues. But I would see the other side of it also and saying, like, yeah, that's a great film, but maybe it shouldn't be the winner.
Yeah.
If it's going to make you feel something, yeah, there should having an award that will acknowledge how this film made people feel something.
Yeah. And this judge was absolutely right that it did deserve an award, maybe a couple, but I like to tell the judges what feels the most like a movie where all the elements come together and make you feel like you're watching a real piece of cinema.
Yeah, I think it's it really is when you're a participant in the film.
Yeah.
And you're there and you're attached to it. And
yeah.
And I want it to be the point, especially when you're judging, when you forget that you're supposed to judge because you become so engrossed by what it is that you're watching.
Yeah.
And then you sit there and go, I need to watch that again because I got caught up in the film, and now I got to take a step back so I can critically review it. But I think there are 2 different lenses that we use as like an audience, and it's just like, do you want to participate or do you want to critique?
Exactly. The measure of a successful 48-hour film for me is, because I'm an editor, if my editor brain gets involved, something's off.
Yeah, exactly.
But if I just watch it and I'm engaged, and I like to call it the 5-year-old me watching Star Wars mode.
Yeah.
If I'm just enraptured with it, they're doing something well. And it's interesting because I've found that on several years, the best film didn't necessarily win that many other awards. I've developed an explanation for why this occurs, which is, so let's say someone goes to the Olympics and they win 2 gold medals. Amazing achievement. But another Olympian goes to the games and wins a gold, 4 silvers, and 3 bronzes.
Yeah.
That's a more accomplished athlete.
Well, it's kind of like looking at a decathlon,
Yeah.
and saying like, oh, here's an athlete that participates in a decathlon. So it's 10 events
Yeah.
versus one event.
Yeah, exactly.
You can both only win one gold medal, but I think the more rounded athlete is the decathlete.
Definitely. Yeah. I think it was 2015 was the year I had the most teams in Seattle. We had 84 teams. That was our high water mark that we're trying to get back to.
Yep.
And I had 3 judges for the whole thing. And one of the judges is a good friend. She's a producer in town. And she went through, 50 of the films and just said, if I ever hear of you making a judge go through that many films again, I will come and pummel you to death.
We've stopped doing that also. Because as you know, like Toronto was always like Toronto and Seattle, sister cities.
Yeah, we were always
kind of neck and neck. I think at that point you were ahead of us.
And it would be like you guys one year, me the next, you guys. And then you just blew up.
Yeah, and then we moved up to 124 teams, and it's like big.
That was crazy.
But for the judging, we realized that early on, we used to have our judges judge them all.
Yeah.
We'd watch them all. We'd usually sit with them, and we do a screening. We sit together, we watch, we have conversations. And most of the time it was to make sure that at the very beginning we had agreed upon sort of baselines. But I put together these ridiculous judging sheets that have 12 different columns for marks to go into. And it's elaborate. It's a lot of work. And when you're going through so many films, everybody gets tired. And then you start rushing your results.
And they blur together after a while.
They blur together, and the judging becomes less efficient.
Yeah.
And I think that's where problems come about. So now, over the last few years, Christopher and I, we go through the films and we just take out the films that we know aren't going to move into a best of.
Yeah.
And we try to scale it down. So we try to take out at least half. We don't have a set number. We get to the stage where we go, these films definitely should not be moving into the best of, and we oftentimes know it, like really easily. You just go like, oh, the sound was so atrocious in this film, there's no way. Or there are elements where you just sit there and say, it's a good film, but it's not a great film. We use one little sort of like safety measure though when we do that, because we worry that maybe we would overlook something.
Yeah.
So instead of giving judges 125 films to watch, we'll say, here's 45 or 50 films. But we do our judging before we do our premiere screenings.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So this way the audience ballots we utilize. So we'll look at the audience ballots. And if there's a film that, say there's 150 people in the audience and the top films are scoring in it as getting 110 people like that film, down to say like 85, those are the sort of the top films in that grouping. We look to see who moved into that top grouping. And if there was a film that maybe our judges didn't watch, we would then know that we overlooked something, and we'll send that film to the judges and say, we need you to watch this film. It's our safety catch. So we always look at the audience and go like, the audience helps us with our judging, because we know like if we overlook something, let's give it a second look. And maybe even if our judging results were, if the audience loves a particular film, but our judges hated it, we'll say, can you please look at this film again?
Yeah, the audience reaction is so different than watching it on a computer at home. The shared experience really can engage you in a film. The story I like to tell is, normally I like to go see movies in the theater on off days. Only for like super big things do I want to go on opening night, like a Star Wars or an Avengers or something. But I really wanted to see Black Panther opening day. I was super excited about it. Chadwick Boseman, amazing. I mean, that cast was stellar. And so Kasha and I went opening day, and Normally, kids in theaters drive me absolutely bonkers. But so I'm watching this film with really the first super high budget black superhero. Got to give props to Wesley Snipes for Blade. I mean, he was the first, but the Marvel Cinematic Universe grew so expansive since Blade came out in the late 90s that it's a different scale entirely. But I had a family of 5 African American parents and children on either side of me, and they were going ballistic the entire movie. And it did not bother me because these kids were so excited by seeing a black superhero, and actually a really complex black antagonist. I can't really call Killmonger a villain because he was definitely more of an antagonist than a villain. And it was such a well-written movie. And when I went and saw it in the theater again, after the crowds had died down, I was by myself, and it's a totally different experience. It was less exciting. It was still, a fantastic movie. I love that. I think that's one of the better superhero movies in existence. But it was just so much more exciting when I was in there with all these kids that were so excited to see it. And I think that spills over to 48 screenings to a lesser extent, a lesser monumental extent.
We've had a goal early on in Toronto, and I wanted to see what we watched on the screen at the premiere screenings. I wanted to be representative of Toronto and what you see when you walk down the street. And I wanted to have that representation of Toronto on the screen and behind the camera, so that there'd be true diversity, which would be attached to what it is that you're watching, and diversity attached to who was making the film.
Mm-hmm.
And we saw certain inequities, imbalances early on in the 48. And you probably did too. If you go back years ago, more often than not, the team leader was always male.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes it was attached to the person who owned the camera.
Yep.
Who's going to be the DOP or cinematographer, male. Sort of like all these key roles were male. And Christopher and I worked really hard in saying, how do we actually make it so that there's a real representation of what's here, and that opportunity is made available for everybody, so that we have more of an appropriate balance based off of the population and the people who exist in Toronto. We want to see it on the screen, behind the camera. So what oftentimes we would do is, say, like at a meet and greet, there'd be actresses who would come to a meet and greet looking to join a team. Oftentimes we'd then talk them into becoming a team leader and running their own team.
There you go.
And I'd say, look, you too often are made to jump through hoops so that you can participate in a film. Here's a chance for you to structure it the way you want to and not jump through the hoops. Yep. Take some of the power and structure the team the way you want to. And it really started to work. And as you start to have people who become involved and they see that you are being inclusive of everybody, and that you want people to participate and you are there to encourage and engage, you end up with really a more sort of balanced group of participants. Mm-hmm. And it's one of the things that we're really proud of. We don't go about trying to accomplish this in such a direct way. I think part of it has to do with just, it was always our hope, and it's just how we try to interact with people and make sure that people are being judged fairly, that there aren't biases being attached. If there's a bias against women, we're not going to allow it. I think in an area where we were very aggressive about it, we realized that the required character oftentimes push things in more sort of like a Anglo-Saxon sort of direction. Yeah. Name. If you're working with all these sort of British names, Jennifer Davidson, Phil Robertson, and as characters, and we thought, we don't want gender to be part of the equation in our character. Yep. So early on, we used to have the same thing that everybody did, that your character would have a feminine and masculine first name. So it's Dave or Diane Smith. I don't know how long we go back, we took that out of our equation and said, we're not doing that anymore. We're not giving you an option of Dave or Diane. We're going to look for a gender neutral.
Yep, we're doing the same. We're doing the same.
I was sort of like looking at these names, and then we did that for a few years. And then we realized we still have to deal with the surname. The surname is also very Anglo-centric, and we're going like, we need to change this, and that's harder to do. So you can find sort of an androgynous first names, but last names, it's harder, but you want to make it so that it doesn't matter who the person is who's playing that character, anybody can play that character. So like this last year, we used the name Brooklyn Moles. Brooklyn Moles could be anybody. You look at that and you go, Brooklyn, sounds like a fake name, which is why I liked it. And going Moles, I'm going, I don't know what sort of, I wouldn't attach any sort of ethnicity or background to that. Like the year before, we used the character Mika Ash. Going like, Mika Ash? That could be anybody from anywhere. Like I could be Mika Ash. I'm Steve Nash. Might as well be Mika Ash. It wouldn't surprise anybody if I was, or anybody else, regardless of sort of skin tone or gender. And it go like, the year before we used Ali Park, and just going like, yeah, Ali Park could be anywhere, because we start to look at things and going like, who's participating in our 48? Who do we want to have? Like we had one team a few years ago, their team name was called Asians in the Six. And their goal was that they wanted to have an all Asian team. And so they did. They put a huge team together, had tremendous success. The short they made ended up traveling around the sort of like the film festival circuit around the world. They're really great about it, and that's sort of what they want to put forth. We have another team that reminds me of that, the young team you mentioned earlier on in our conversation about the 14-year-olds. We had a team years ago, and I think they were all sort of their background, their family, I think they're all born in Canada. I think their family backgrounds were all Chinese. We had 5 kids in the theater who were 16 years old. They've held signed parental release forms so they could participate in the 48. They came to the premiere screening with their parents. They were the youngest participants we'd ever had as a full team. Christopher and I really worked hard on making them feel welcome, because they acknowledged to us that they were worried they wouldn't be accepted because they were so young. And I said, no, you're a 48er now. You're one of us. Everybody loves you. Your family, you're in. But they were nervous, not knowing anything about the 48. So they're there with their family. They're watching their film. The film was okay. They tried really hard. And then after that, this was about 7 years ago, they participated every year. They're all now in university. They go to different schools in different parts of Canada. They come back to Toronto to do the 48. It's almost like a reunion of friends. So they all get together and say like, okay, we're back here together now. We're going to do a 48. This is what we do. And this last year, they made a film called Canadian Enough. I posted it on our Facebook page for the Toronto Facebook page. If anybody wanted to scroll down probably 20 posts or so, you'll see a film called Canadian Enough. And they started talking about, what does it take to be Canadian? At what point are you Canadian enough? At what point are you Canadian? And they're talking about using the character named Brooklyn Moles. One of the characters says to the other character, why are you using such a fake sounding name? And the character says, people respond to me differently. And I said, if I use my Chinese name, sometimes people don't respond to me well at all. And you sit there and you go like, oh, there's some racism attached to what these people experience. And so even they built this into their story. And as I talked to the filmmakers, they said, yes, we wanted to do something which is personal, because a lot of us have Canadian names. We might also have a Chinese name that we don't use, except for within family. And it becomes awkward on how do you function? What name are you going with? Are people going to respond to you differently based off of your name or your background? So the team said, we want to do a film this is the most personal film they said they've ever done. I absolutely love it. It did not move into our best of, because I thought there were some technical issues with the film. But when you're talking about content, it resonated, and it resonated with everybody. And I think it was just a beautiful, important film. And yeah, we didn't give them an award for it. But after talking to you, I'm thinking like, that's where we need to have an award for films like this.
That's exactly. So several years ago, I really, really, really wanted to push more inclusion, more diversity on all levels. I wanted more to push for more representation among BIPOC filmmakers, LGBTQ filmmakers, immigrant filmmakers, women filmmakers, young filmmakers. And I think we have an award for just about every one of those categories now. And there'll be an organization that'll sponsor like a $50 prize or $100 prize for each of those. It's important to me because, as you know, I'm about as white gets. I've got the 23andMe results to prove it. And I always have a hard time talking about things like this. Like, I recognize my privilege as a white male in American society. It's hard to talk about it in a public forum because I don't want to be congratulated for it. So it's a bit of a tightrope, but it is important to me. I know it's important to our filmmaking community, and Chris is totally behind me. And one thing we did is we got rid of gender in our acting awards.
Yeah.
So we have Best Actor, Best Supporting Actor, Best Ensemble, and then just to make sure that the broadest array of actors is represented, we have Best Acting in a Comedy and Best Acting in a Drama as well. So we have 5 acting awards that are all genderless because it seems to be such an outmoded concept in this day and age.
Christopher and I, we've been talking about this extensively for the last 2 years. Extensively. We still have gender-based awards. We have genderless character names, but we have gender-based awards on the acting front. And we've been struggling with it for the last 2 years. And one of the issues that maybe you can help us with, because we're looking at, because for me, I look at this just from a human rights perspective. I just think like all human beings are equal, period. And I go, if you're a human being, we are all of absolute equal value. And before, as I said, what I want to see in the 48 is just a representation of the city where I live. And the city is filled up with people of all different backgrounds and people who would self-identify in different ways. And they're all equal. They're all of absolute equal value. So looking at it from that way, it's helped me a lot just going from the human rights side of it. But when I'm looking at sort of like the acting role and go like actress, actor, you call it performer. The only reason we didn't move to having genderless acting roles is because we wouldn't know what to do if all of the awards went to actors, like actors in sort of a non-genderless sort of term, performers who look male and self-identify as male. And suddenly every single acting award is going to a straight male performer. God help you if it's all straight white male performers are on your slate. And with the notion that they all truly deserve every award that they got because they're incredible performers. But suddenly there are less awards for people who self-identify as something else. And that's our dilemma. We're going, I like what you're saying about adding more to it and going like, put in more awards so you can have a background, but how do we do it so that it's fair, it's equitable? How do we take the gender out of the equation when we all agree that gender should not be part of the equation, but it's perceived as being part of it if all of your awards go to white-looking men who identify as straight.
Well, it's a discussion you have to have with your judges and
as male. So it is a thing with judges, but we're just struggling on it. And I'm sorry I cut you off there.
Here's how we did it in Seattle. Is I was proposing this to a judge one year, and they said, "Well, what if a cis white hetero dude swept them all?"
Yeah,
and that got stuck in my head. It got me stuck in that place.
That's where I'm stuck.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then a couple of years ago, Chris and I were talking about it, and we're just going to fucking pull the trigger and we're going to make this happen. We didn't announce that we were making a change to the awards. We just changed them, and no one noticed. No one was unhappy with the results.
Now, was it lucky based off of the award winners? Are you lucky there in that sort of regard?
I think it was our decision to not announce that we were doing this. And when the judges were confronted with it, I think they thought a bit more critically about the performances, because we got a balance. I think the first year we did it, a cis hetero white guy won, but deservedly. But there were the other 4 awards, there was a rainbow involved in that. So even though a cis hetero white guy won the top award, there was still representation throughout the remainder of the awards through supporting and ensemble, comedy, and drama. But our approach was, we just want to normalize this. We don't want to make a big deal about, hey, we're doing this. We're white progressives from the suburbs. We're your ally. We just said, no, this needs to be normalized. So we just did it. And it's been popular. No one's had an issue with the awards for acting since we did this. Plus, we have the additional, so we have the Women in Film Seattle sponsor the Buffy Award for Achievement in Filmmaking by Women Filmmakers. We have the We'll All Be Working for Them in 10 Years Award, which is for young filmmaking teams. And we have an award. I don't pick the winner of this, but my freelance editing company, Media Without Borders, sponsors the 48 Without Borders Award, which is to award excellence in filmmaking for BIPOC and LGBTQ and immigrant filmmakers. And I learned a lesson on that. I think it was the second year we awarded that one. When I was handing out the award at the event, I didn't think through how my wording on presenting this award, and the team that won didn't look terribly excited when they got up to pick up their award. I'm going to break it here for this episode because I really want to front load the next episode with this story, because I think it's very important in terms of my approach to this particular award, what my intent was, and how I learned from it.
So it really doesn't matter what you look like, say or do. I know that I had a cooler weekend than you.
48 Hour Heroes Origin Stories is a production of Media Without Borders and the Seattle 48 Hour Film Project.